Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.
This is St. Louis on the Air from St. Louis Public Radio. I'm Elaine Cha. Something I heard often as a visitor to St. Louis was, there's really incredible architecture here. I still hear that now as a longtime transplant, and it's easy to see too. Taking a ride or drive through different parts of the city presents an amazing variety of building styles and materials. That range also extends to the condition of structures and their components, and that's part of the story being told through the exhibition Urban Archaeology, Lost Buildings of St. Louis. Joining me to talk about that exhibition are two of the three people who organized it. That's Stephanie Weissberg, a curator at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation. Welcome to you.
Thank you so much.
And Michael Allen, director of the National Building Arts Center in Sauget, Illinois.
Glad to be here.
Now, the two of you, along with the Pulitzer's Molly Moog, organized this exhibition. Stephanie, how did you all decide on the scope of this show?
Well, I think it was, the framing of the exhibition was very much, in some ways, Michael's impetus. I can speak perhaps to some of the ways in which the Pulitzer identified the National Building Arts Center as a natural partner for this exhibition. And I think Michael brought a lot to the table in terms of specific ideas and framing for the exhibition. But in terms of the decision to approach the National Building Arts Center about a partnership, that came out of, I think, a natural alliance between the two institutions. The Pulitzer is an arts museum that is housed inside of a building that is an architectural landmark built by the Pritzker Prize award-winning architect Tadao Ando. And in many ways, the architectural space at the Pulitzer informs our approach to exhibition making as well as the content that we display. We've done many exhibitions that relate to the architectural history of St. Louis or the broader region. And the National Building Arts Center has long been on our radar as an institution that has an incredible wealth of resources. Mm-hmm. So we approached Michael Allen out of a desire to collaborate and knowing that the two institutions in many ways are perhaps inclined towards the experimental and that Michael would bring a really fresh and interesting take to the exhibition. So Michael, maybe you can talk a little bit more about your framing ideas.
Yeah, sure.
Right. I mean, the National Building Arts Center is a unique institution right now in that we have the largest collection of architectural artifacts in the nation, one of the largest in the world, but we have no permanent available exhibition space. So this is also a very natural partnership because we can't do at our site the things we could do at the Pulitzer. Mm-hmm. While you can see a lot in our warehouses and on open crating, it's pretty raw and pretty rugged and lacks the kind of curatorial touch. So urban archaeology to me was a chance to really explore the meaning of why the collection exists, since this is our first large sort of cross-category exhibition, rather than focus on a material or a site, although those are pretty inflected in the content. I think each gallery sort of flows from this question of why do people do this? Why do they destroy cities? Why are other people convinced that there's meaning in recovering the pieces, be it a whole building, a single artifact, a set of artifacts, or a neighborhood? And what is this idea of urban archaeology? I mean, archaeology is literally the use of artifacts to understand human history. And so while we have an architectural or building based collection, there's other meanings that are far from specialized expertise that come out of these objects. Mm-hmm. They're objects of profound memory. They're collectively recognized as such. So, what does it mean to excavate a city? And what can we learn about ourselves?
Mm-hmm. Now, this is the Lost Buildings of St. Louis. What about that part of it? What does lost mean?
Yes, good question. Because that's also a little bit of a wordplay, because obviously they're not lost. They're in the exhibition, right? So, but what we are noting with that subtitle is that they no longer stand as physical three-dimensional objects on the sites where they were constructed. So they exist in crates in our warehouse. They exist in the wonderful great displays at the Pulitzer. Through February 4th, they're going to be on display. They exist in pieces that don't have the kind of permanence and visibility that these pieces did when they were on the front of a building.
Right.
On the other hand, many of these pieces probably were not as remarked upon or thought about when they were just part of the built environment that people walk and drive past on a daily basis. So losing something in one form might actually make finding the meaning more likely in the representation.
So, Stephanie, as far as the Pulitzer Arts Foundation is concerned, I mean, what was it that it wanted to see in its space, especially given where it is located and what it has exhibited over the last decade or so?
Yeah, I think the idea of architecture within architecture was one of the primary ideas that we approach this partnership, knowing that it is oftentimes powerful when we bring elements from the city's architectural identity into our space. It often creates a heightened sense of not only an awareness of what the city looks like, used to look like, but also people's experience of the Pulitzer's building. I think in some ways the experience inflects in both directions. I think as the conversation evolved, one thing that was really exciting about the potential for this exhibition is, at the Pulitzer, is that there are many exhibitions on the subject of architecture. It's not an uncommon subject matter to see, not just in art museums, but also in history museums. But what felt particularly interesting about the potential of this collaboration was to also touch upon the notion of salvage and preservation, which the National Building Arts Center is uniquely qualified to do, as it was run by a person who was really a leader and a pioneer in the field for many, many, many years. And so it was exciting not only to think about bringing attention to the formal beauty of these objects, but also shedding light on the societal conditions that have brought them to their current state, whether it's being housed at the National Building Arts Center or being shown at the Pulitzer. And then I do think that the idea of the bringing objects of architectural beauty into the space at the Pulitzer felt like a very obvious draw. As Michael said, I think one of the exciting things about this exhibition for us and for me as a non-architectural expert is that in seeing these objects called out in a space outside of their original context, it not only allows you to look more closely at those objects in particular, but also hopefully hones your attention once you leave the Pulitzer's doors or NBAC's campus to then note similar or distinct elements throughout the city. So one of the things that we really hope to do at a museum is to cultivate close looking and encourage people to spend long periods of time engaging very directly with the objects on display, with the hope not just that it creates a specific experience within the walls of the Pulitzer, but that also it helps us transform the way we see our environment when we leave that space. And I think that this exhibition helps people to do that. It certainly has helped me to do that.
Mm-hmm. Now, let's talk about the exhibition itself. St. Louis is known as a city of bricks. Michael, how is that represented in this exhibit beyond the bricks themselves? Like I saw them when I went in to take a look, but what is beyond the physical items?
Right. Yeah. I mean, we literally have a brick in a display case, a single brick. So we're definitely noting the red brick heritage, but we wouldn't have the red brick without the rich clay deposits that also include fire clay that makes the terracotta, another material we explore in detail. We wouldn't know about this clay without geological survey. We wouldn't have it wrought into the built environment without the efforts of miners and laborers at the factories and all the capital that goes into that enterprise. So I think what we're trying to pull out of the one gallery, especially dedicated to the ceramics and the labor, and is thinking about all the intangible aspects that lead to the shape of a very basic and downright ubiquitous building material. A brick is not just a brick, not from a design standpoint, but also not from a social or economic or political lens. So I think we're trying to look at how the brick is situated in systems, in multiple systems simultaneously. There's the production, but then how does the brick end up in the exhibition? Well, that's another set of processes of planning and removal of buildings. Demolition is a form of labor. Salvage is a form of labor. The act of removing heavy pieces sometimes is very expensive, just as expensive as putting the building up. So there are decisions to spend social resources, such as money, capital, in certain ways. And I hope a brick looks differently after you think through all these uses. It's not just a single unit that lays up in a wall. It is something that, helps build a society and then reflects on how that society is changing.
We're speaking with Michael Allen, director of the National Building Arts Center in Sauget, Illinois, and Stephanie Weissberg, a curator at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation. And we're speaking about a new exhibition that is up called Urban Archaeology, Lost Buildings of St. Louis. There are many items in the exhibition that were made at a time when St. Louis business leaders wanted people locally and globally, too, to see and recognize their power and the size of their bank accounts. And dropping big bucks on building commissions included ornate decorative elements like lion heads, which are, there are quite a few of them, and hand carvings. Is there one, Stephanie, that seems to have captured visitors' interest the most?
Speaking of the lion heads, I would probably say from the Buder building, there is a very impressive lion decorative element with a pendant that Michael can correct me if I'm phrasing this incorrectly, but as I understand, is the first example of a colored glazed terracotta in an architectural context, which is quite notable and interesting. It's visually a very compelling object. It also, as you said, speaks to this moment more than a century prior in which St. Louis was using downtown, where the Buder building once stood, as a means of telegraphing the ambition and the economic success of the region. And the architectural context really speaks to the city's ability, not only its ambitions, but its ability to signal such wealth and power. We do have a section in the exhibition dedicated to downtown, and there are a number of examples of buildings that were, in fact, posed challenges to installing in the Pulitzer because of their weight. And I think the heaviest item that we have is over 2,000 pounds in the exhibition. So you think about, it was a challenge to install these at floor level. To hoist these up multiple stories really speaks to the investment in these buildings.
One of those everyday things that you would pass it by and not really pay attention to because you didn't have to do any of that work. How about some of the smaller pieces? There's a small marble remnant of the downtown Century building. How do those smaller pieces highlight both the way those buildings went up, as we were just talking about, and then what took them down? Michael?
Yeah, well, I think throughout the exhibition, there's a play with scale from the very large to the very small. And I think that's something that also responds to the Ondo building, which is extremely beautiful, minimalist building that's also very symbolic of a certain stake in making St. Louis a venue, a venue for modern contemporary art, for high quality architecture. So I think every object kind of reflects this play of the meaning can be found deep and small. I guess one of the small pieces I would point out is there's a painting by Robert Greene, the only living artist included in the show, who collects from the North Side, where he took materials from a machine he found in the old Missouri Homeopathic Medical College on Jefferson, which was torn down for the NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. And he wove these metal pieces. I mean, these are pieces that you wouldn't even have noticed if you saw the machine. They're like from the innards. But he wove them into a pattern that sort of responds to the site and the lost grid of blocks that were destroyed for the NGA. And then painted it, various colors. And it's a small little piece that to me unfolds into multitudes. It's the smallest object in the show is one of those little metal bands that he's working with. But to him, it's like this is a metonym for an entire lost neighborhood. And I think it's just really remarkable. And it really speaks to, the larger collection has these moments, these big moments Stephanie was talking about with, lions' heads and carved stone. But you get down to a piece of a machine, and that still has meaning, not just representing the machine, but representing the social history of the place it comes from.
And I took a picture of that. It stood out among the other items that were around in quite a large space. So I'm glad to know that that history about it. Something that is a big part of this exhibit, it's about the way things were demolished in efforts to get to urban renewal. Michael, very briefly, can you remind us what is urban renewal?
How long do we have? Urban renewal is in the eye of the beholder. The idea that something is being renewed for whom, and then how does that measured? But generally, it's a set of public policies that come after World War II, although there's early 20th century and mid 20th century versions of it, like the Gateway Arch clearance, which is included. But mostly it's a period after World War II where cities thought that the very stock of the built environment had to be systematically rebuilt, through demolition and reconstruction, to ensure cities' economies would survive, that people's needs for modern housing would be met, that cities could modernize. And so it's the strain that brings us the clearance for Pruitt-Igoe. It's the strain that's still active, bringing us projects like the NGA. And a lot of urban renewal, though, is on a smaller scale. It's demolitions for small parks or a single office building. Sometimes it's cumulative, like our displays in Grand Center and downtown look at buildings that were demolished for different reasons, but they're in close proximity and they leave this sort of really changed built environment, sometimes for the better, sometimes not so much.
Yeah. Part of this exhibit, Stephanie, it features oral histories that accompany the displayed objects, and that approach is not unusual at art museums. But what about that felt particularly apropos for urban archaeology?
I think it felt, even beyond apropos, it felt like an imperative to us to include voices from the many communities that are affected both professionally and personally by the architectural loss in St. Louis, but also by the fields of preservation and salvage. Really, probably all of us are on a daily basis touched individually by these factors in our city. And as part of the exhibition, I think we had over 30 stakeholders that we brought in to invite feedback on the topic because it is so personal. And the feedback that we received many times over was that including a range of perspectives was very important. So in order to be able to delve beyond just the limited room that we have for written didactics and beyond the stories that can be told by this selection of objects, which is just one of many different checklists that one could have developed. We worked with people across many different positions, former residents, people who were bricklayers, alder people, across a range of spectrums to speak specifically about the objects on view and to offer a deeper level of nuance.
Mm-hmm. Now, the thing that I would like to end on, I went to see the exhibition at the Pulitzer yesterday, and I happened to arrive near the beginning of a tour for photography students from a local university. And when we got to the part that focuses on bricks, the person who's leading the tour noted that if you looked very closely, that you could see fingerprints of brickmakers and animal prints embedded in some of the bricks as well. And it really drove home the fact that, buildings get built by people and that they go up in environments where people and other things live. Just for each of you, in curating this exhibition, what is the human story that you really want people to see or even to feel? Michael?
Yes. Each piece from the fingerprints and that you noted, or the finger marks in the back of terracotta, which is, a hollow material, and we have one of the panels backwards, to the sgraffito in the Rivoli facade, which is scraped back by hand to reveal one color coming through the next. It's like implicit in each piece is this act of craft, and its removal and care, and its curation. These are continued acts of care and maintenance. I think the biggest takeaway for me is that these objects that don't have to be so highly wrought or so beautiful or so symbolic, because you could build buildings to house offices or residences with much simpler material. That this is an embedded meaning that really shows the deeper value of building these places, of a city that could produce this architecture. And then that meaning, although it's changed, is alive and well in the minds of those who are still using the same objects even after they come off the buildings to facilitate memory work and storytelling. So it's like this city mattered and matters so much to so many people. And the simplest little object is testament to that care that goes into city making.
Stephanie?
To Michael's point, I think the exhibition points to the human need for beauty and this deep desire that we have to surround ourselves with beauty. One object that I'll point to that was fascinating to me is a planter that's made from the same material as a sewer pipe that a person who was a laborer at a sewer pipe plant brought home and carved into a planter, carving lines to simulate wood grain, and brought their work and their craft home with them and interpreted it as an object of beauty. I think that speaks to how the most utilitarian of objects can reflect our core values and reflect the hand of individuals who often remain anonymous.
Stephanie Weissberg is a curator at the Pulitzer Arts Foundation, and Michael Allen is director of the National Building Arts Center in Sauget, Illinois. They're both members of a group of curators who put together Urban Archaeology, Lost Buildings of St. Louis. Thank you both for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
This episode was produced by Elaine Cha and by executive producer Alex Hoyer. Edited by Emily Woodbury. Audio engineering support and podcast design by Aaron Dorr.
St. Louis on the Air is a production of St. Louis Public Radio. Understanding starts here.
St. Louis on the Air proudly supports local artists by using music from Life Creative Group.
Do you find yourself regularly listening to episodes of St. Louis on the Air? Suggest us to a friend you think might enjoy our conversations. And leave us a review and rating on Apple Podcasts on the App Store. It's the simplest way to help people discover our show. Thanks.
St. Louis Public Radio is a member-supported service of the University of Missouri St. Louis.
Support comes from the Missouri Forest Products Association, saluting Earth Day on April 22nd with an ongoing commitment to help offset carbon emissions with sustainable harvesting of Missouri forests. Details at choosewood.com.